People like you shouldn't even walk into stores like this." The words sliced through the quiet luxury boutique so sharply that several shoppers immediately turned their heads. Claire Bennett froze beside a display of children's dresses, her fingers still gently holding the pale blue fabric Lily had fallen in love with only minutes earlier. For a second, the entire store felt silent except for the soft instrumental piano music drifting through the ceiling speakers. Claire slowly looked up and saw the woman standing a few feet away from her. Tall blonde hair perfectly styled, diamond bracelet sparkling beneath the showroom lights. Designer heels that probably cost more than Claire's monthly rent. Vanessa Whitmore stood there with a cold smile on her face, one manicured hand resting against an expensive leather handbag, while her eyes traveled up and down Claire's worn coat like she was examining something dirty on the sidewalk. 8-year-old Lily looked between them nervously, clutching the sleeve of her mother's sweater. "Mom," she whispered softly. Claire swallowed the humiliation rising in her throat. She had dealt with judgment before. Being a single mother in Chicago meant people often looked at her differently the second they noticed the thrift store shoes or the old sedan she drove. But today mattered too much for her to let it ruin Lily's excitement. She forced a small smile and knelt beside her daughter. "It's okay, sweetheart." Lily looked back at the dress. "But this is the one, Mom." Claire's chest tightened instantly. Of course it was. The light blue dress shimmered softly under the boutique lights, elegant without looking too grown-up. Perfect for Lily's upcoming piano recital at school. The first real recital she had ever been invited to perform in front of parents, teachers, and local judges. Claire had spent 3 extra weekends working double shifts at the diner just to save enough money to bring her here. She reached into her purse again, discreetly counting folded bills and loose dollar notes for what had to be the 5th time. Maybe if she skipped groceries for a few days, she could still make it work. Vanessa let out a quiet laugh that wasn't quiet enough. "Unbelievable," she muttered to the sales associate beside her. "Now people treat luxury stores like discount outlets." The young employee shifted awkwardly without responding. Claire felt heat rise to her face as more customers slowly glanced in her direction. She could feel the judgment already building in the room. The assumptions. Poor single mother. Can't afford anything here. Probably wasting everyone's time. Lily looked down at her sneakers. "Mom, should we leave?" That question hurt more than anything else. Claire immediately shook her head. "No, baby. You have every right to be here." But even as she said the words, she noticed another employee whispering quietly near the register while glancing toward them. Vanessa crossed her arms, clearly enjoying the attention now surrounding the scene. "Some people just don't understand embarrassment," she said loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. Claire slowly stood back up, trying desperately to keep her composure for Lily's sake. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say a single word, someone from the upper level of the boutique stopped walking and quietly looked down toward them from behind the glass railing above. The man upstairs remained perfectly still behind the glass railing, one hand resting lightly against the polished metal as his eyes stayed locked on Claire and Lily below. From where he stood, he could see the little girl shrinking closer to her mother with every whispered comment spreading through the boutique. He noticed the way Claire kept forcing herself to stand tall despite the humiliation burning across her face. Most people would have walked out already, but she stayed because of her daughter. And somehow, that caught his attention immediately. Downstairs, Vanessa gave a dramatic sigh before turning toward the nearest sales associate. "I asked for a private shopping experience today," she said with a smile that looked pleasant only from a distance. "Not this." The employee glanced nervously at Claire. "Ma'am, maybe we can help you find something within your budget section." Claire immediately understood what that meant. The clearance racks were downstairs near the outlet entrance, far away from the designer floor. Lily's eyes widened slightly as she realized it too. "But this dress is here," Lily said quietly, pointing toward the blue recital dress still hanging nearby. Vanessa tilted her head and gave the child a look filled with fake sympathy. "Sweetheart, dresses like that are usually for special occasions." Claire felt her stomach drop at the implication. Lily looked confused for a second before lowering her eyes to the floor. "It is for a special occasion," she whispered softly. "I am playing piano at school." For the briefest moment, even the sales associate looked uncomfortable. But Vanessa simply laughed under her breath. How adorable. Claire took a slow breath, fighting to keep her emotions under control. She gently placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. You do not need to explain yourself to anyone. Vanessa crossed her arms. Then maybe you should explain why you are handling merchandise you clearly cannot afford. Several nearby shoppers pretended not to stare while openly listening now. Claire could feel every pair of eyes on her old coat, her faded purse, the exhaustion beneath her eyes after years of balancing rent, bills, childcare, and endless overnight shifts at the diner. She hated this feeling. Not because of herself anymore. She could survive embarrassment. But Lily should never have to feel ashamed for being raised by a struggling mother. Lily slowly tugged at Claire's sleeve. Mom, it is okay. We can go. Claire looked down at her daughter and saw the disappointment she was trying so hard to hide. That hurt worse than Vanessa's insults ever could. No, Claire said softly but firmly. You worked hard for that recital. You deserve to feel beautiful when you walk on that stage. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. This is becoming uncomfortable for everyone. Then she looked directly at the sales associate again. Honestly, if your store allows people to wander in here begging for sympathy, maybe I should take my business elsewhere. The employee immediately panicked. Everyone in Chicago's luxury shopping district knew who Vanessa Whitmore was. Her husband owned one of the largest investment companies in the country, and her social media following alone brought attention to every brand she touched. Losing her business could mean losing major publicity. The sales associate straightened nervously. Ma'am, she said carefully to Claire. Perhaps today is not the best day to shop here. Claire stared at her in disbelief. Are you seriously asking us to leave? Before the employee could answer, Lily suddenly spoke in a trembling voice, so quiet it almost disappeared beneath the music playing overhead. Mom, are people mad because we are poor? And from the second floor above them, the man near the railing slowly lifted his eyes from Lily to Vanessa, his expression changing completely. Claire's heart broke the moment she heard Lily ask that question. The little girl stood there clutching the edge of her mother's sweater with tears beginning to gather in her eyes, trying so hard not to cry in front of strangers. Every painful memory Claire had spent years shielding her daughter from suddenly felt exposed beneath the bright boutique lights. Claire immediately knelt beside her and gently brushed a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. No, sweetheart, she said softly. Nobody gets to decide your value because of money. But even as she spoke, the silence around them said otherwise. Vanessa Whitmore gave a quiet scoff and looked around the store as if she was exhausted by the entire situation. This is exactly what I mean, she muttered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. People turn everything into some emotional performance these days. Claire slowly stood again, her face calm even though humiliation burned through her chest. We are not bothering anyone, she said carefully. My daughter only wanted to try on a dress. Vanessa tilted her head with fake curiosity. And how exactly were you planning to pay for it? Claire did not answer immediately because the truth was painful. She still was not entirely sure. Rent was due in 4 days. Her car needed repairs. The electricity bill sat folded unopened on the kitchen counter because she already knew she could not afford it this month. But Lily had practiced piano every single night for almost a year on an old secondhand keyboard with 2 broken keys. She deserved one beautiful thing. Vanessa smiled coldly when Claire stayed quiet. That is what I thought. The sales associate near the register shifted uncomfortably while another employee whispered something into a headset. Claire noticed it instantly. They were preparing for her to become a problem. Lily looked up nervously. Mom, maybe I can wear my old dress. Claire forced herself to smile at her daughter even though her eyes stung. Honey, your old dress barely fits anymore. Vanessa crossed her arms. Then perhaps she should learn that life has limits. The cruelty of the comment hung heavily in the air. One older woman shopping nearby frowned slightly at Vanessa, but stayed silent. Nobody wanted to involve themselves. Wealth carried power in places like this. Claire finally straightened her shoulders. You know nothing about my daughter, she said quietly. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound more personal. No, but I know desperation when I see it. Claire felt anger rise in her chest for the first time. Not because Vanessa insulted her, because Lily was hearing every word. I came here to buy my daughter a dress, Claire replied firmly. Not your approval. For a brief second, several shoppers looked impressed by her composure. But Vanessa's expression darkened immediately. She clearly was not used to being challenged. Interesting, she said slowly. Because from where I am standing, it looks more like you came here hoping someone would feel sorry for you. Lily lowered her head further, embarrassed by the attention surrounding them now. Claire reached for her daughter's hand instinctively. And upstairs above the boutique floor, the man near the railing quietly watched the interaction without saying a word. His eyes remained fixed on Claire, not because she looked defeated, but because she refused to become cruel even after being humiliated publicly. That was rare. Very rare. Downstairs, Vanessa suddenly looked toward the store manager approaching from the back office. A relieved smile spread across her face. Perfect timing, she said smoothly. I think we have a situation here. The manager immediately recognized Vanessa and straightened his suit nervously. Mrs. Whitmore, he said politely. Is there a problem? Vanessa gestured dramatically toward Claire and Lily. I would simply like to enjoy my shopping experience without unnecessary disruption. The manager glanced briefly at Claire's worn coat and instantly made his decision. The manager's expression changed almost instantly after looking at Claire and Lily. The warmth in his face disappeared, replaced by the stiff professional smile people used when they wanted someone gone without creating a scene. Ma'am, he said carefully, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Vanessa folded her arms with satisfaction already spreading across her face. Claire stared at him in disbelief. A misunderstanding, she repeated quietly. Your customer just insulted my daughter in front of the entire store. The manager avoided eye contact for half a second before turning toward Vanessa again. Mrs. Whitmore is one of our most valued clients. Claire immediately understood what that meant. In this store, money decided who deserved respect. Lily tightened her grip around her mother's hand. The little girl looked overwhelmed now, her eyes darting nervously between the adults surrounding them. Claire could feel her daughter trembling slightly. That was the moment humiliation turned into something else entirely. Anger. Not loud anger. Not explosive anger. The quiet kind that came from watching someone hurt your child for no reason at all. Vanessa gave a dramatic sigh and glanced toward the other shoppers nearby. I really did not want this to become uncomfortable, she said smoothly. But some people simply refuse to understand boundaries. Claire looked directly at her. What boundary did my daughter cross by trying on a dress? Vanessa smiled faintly. Luxury spaces exist for a reason. The words landed exactly the way she intended them to. Claire saw several people lower their eyes awkwardly while pretending not to hear. Nobody stepped in. Nobody defended Lily. The manager cleared his throat softly. Ma'am, perhaps it would be best if you continued your shopping elsewhere. Today, Claire blinked slowly. You are asking us to leave because my daughter wanted a dress for her piano recital? We are simply trying to avoid further disruption, the manager replied carefully. Lily looked up at her mother with confusion written across her face. Mom, did I do something bad? Claire's heart shattered again. She immediately knelt beside her daughter and held both of her small hands gently. No, sweetheart. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Lily's voice trembled. Then why do they want us to leave? Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because how could she explain cruelty like this to an 8-year-old child without damaging the softness still left in her heart? Vanessa checked her reflection in a nearby mirror as if she was bored already. Honestly, she said casually, children learn important lessons from situations like this. Claire slowly stood again, disbelief crossing her face. Important lessons? Vanessa nodded once. That life is not fair. That not everyone belongs everywhere. Several shoppers exchanged uncomfortable looks now. Even the young sales associate appeared visibly uneasy hearing the comment directed toward a little girl. But Vanessa seemed completely unbothered by the tension filling the boutique. She was too used to people agreeing with her. Too used to wealth protecting her from consequences. Upstairs, the man near the railing had not moved once. His eyes stayed fixed on the scene below, but his expression had become colder with every passing minute. One employee walking past him suddenly slowed down after noticing who he was. The employee's face went pale instantly. But before he could say anything, the man gave a subtle shake of his head. Not yet. Downstairs, Claire finally reached into her purse again and pulled out the folded cash she had spent weeks saving. Her hands shook slightly from embarrassment as she looked toward the manager. I can pay for the dress. Vanessa laughed softly the second she saw the crumpled bills. Oh my God, she whispered under her breath. Claire's cheeks burned red instantly, but she refused to lower her hand. I said I can pay for it. The manager looked at the money. briefly before forcing another uncomfortable smile. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said, "but I think it would be best if you left the store now." And for the first time since entering the boutique, Claire looked completely humiliated. For several long seconds, Claire could not move. The folded bills remained in her trembling hand while every eye inside the boutique stayed fixed on her. She had experienced embarrassment before. She had been judged for being a young single mother. She had worked exhausting overnight shifts while customers snapped their fingers at her like she barely existed. She had smiled through pity, whispers, and cold stares for years. But this felt different because Lily was standing beside her watching all of it happen in real time. Vanessa Whitmore adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist with a satisfied expression, completely confident the situation was over. "Thank you," she told the manager smoothly. Some standards should still exist. Claire slowly lowered the cash back into her purse. She could feel Lily looking up at her, waiting for reassurance that everything would somehow still be okay. But Claire no longer trusted her own voice enough to speak without breaking. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered softly. Lily nodded quietly, though her eyes stayed fixed on the blue recital dress hanging nearby. That look nearly destroyed Claire. The little girl was trying so hard not to cry. As Claire reached for her daughter's hand, a calm male voice suddenly echoed from above them. "I would like to know exactly what standards you are referring to." The entire boutique froze instantly. Every head turned toward the second-floor railing. The man who had been silently observing the entire scene finally stepped forward into full view beneath the warm overhead lighting. He looked to be in his early 40s, sharply dressed in a dark-tailored coat with an expression so composed it almost felt intimidating. There was no anger in his face. That somehow made the silence around him even heavier. The manager's eyes widened immediately the second he recognized him. The color drained from his face so quickly it startled the employees nearby. Vanessa blinked in confusion at first, clearly not expecting anyone to interrupt. Then her confident smile faltered slightly. "Adrian," she said, surprised. Claire looked between them, confused. Lily instinctively moved closer to her mother again. The man slowly descended the staircase without taking his eyes off the situation below. Every employee in the boutique straightened nervously as he approached. Even the shoppers who had been pretending not to watch now stood completely still. The manager swallowed hard. "Mr. Whitmore," he said nervously, "I did not realize you were here today." Adrian Whitmore stopped a few feet away from Claire and Lily. His attention moved briefly toward the blue recital dress still hanging beside them before returning to the manager. "Clearly," he replied calmly. Vanessa forced a laugh and walked toward him quickly, slipping into a softer tone completely different from the one she had used moments earlier. "Honey, this has all been a misunderstanding." Adrian finally looked at her directly. "I watched the entire thing." The confidence in Vanessa's posture shifted almost instantly. Around them, the boutique had become so quiet that even the soft piano music overhead suddenly felt painfully loud. Claire stood frozen beside Lily, still not fully understanding who this man was beyond the obvious fact that everyone in the store seemed terrified of disappointing him. Adrian's gaze moved toward Lily next. The little girl immediately lowered her eyes shyly, still clutching her mother's hand. Then his expression changed slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for someone paying close attention to notice something unexpected behind his calm demeanor. Recognition. Very faint. Very brief. His eyes lingered on the small silver necklace resting against Lily's sweater. A tiny heart-shaped pendant worn from age. Claire noticed his stare and instinctively touched the necklace gently. The movement seemed to pull Adrian out of whatever thought had crossed his mind. Vanessa quickly stepped closer to him again. "They were causing a disturbance," she explained smoothly. The manager was simply protecting the atmosphere of the store. Adrian looked back at her slowly. "Hey, little girl trying to buy a dress for her piano recital is a disturbance." Nobody answered. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Vanessa opened her mouth as if searching for the perfect explanation, but for the first time since the confrontation began, no confident words came easily. Adrian Whitmore stood calmly in the center of the boutique, his attention shifting between his wife, the nervous manager, and the exhausted mother still standing protectively beside her daughter. The atmosphere inside the store had changed completely. A few minutes earlier, everyone had watched Claire like she did not belong there. Now nobody seemed willing to even breathe too loudly. Vanessa forced a soft laugh. "Adrian, you are making this sound dramatic." His expression did not change. Am I? She folded her arms carefully, trying to regain control of the situation. This woman was creating discomfort for customers. The staff handled it appropriately. Adrian glanced toward the employees lining the showroom floor. Several immediately lowered their eyes. The manager cleared his throat nervously. Sir, we were simply trying to avoid conflict. Adrian looked directly at him. By humiliating a child, the manager's face lost even more color. Claire remained frozen near the dress display, still unsure whether this was actually helping or somehow making things worse. She hated being the center of attention. More than anything, she just wanted to take Lily home before the little girl cried in front of everyone. Lily quietly leaned against her mother's side, still clutching the tiny silver necklace resting against her sweater. Adrian's eyes drifted toward the pendant again for the briefest second. Something about it clearly unsettled him, though he said nothing yet. Vanessa noticed his distraction immediately. You are seriously taking their side? She asked quietly, disbelief slipping into her voice now. Adrian finally turned toward her fully. I am taking the side of basic decency. The words landed hard. Several shoppers exchanged stunned looks. Vanessa's cheeks flushed slightly, more from embarrassment than guilt. She was not used to being corrected publicly, especially not by her husband. You did not hear everything that happened, she replied sharply. I heard enough. Claire looked down, uncomfortable standing in the middle of a wealthy couple's argument. It is okay, she said softly. We were leaving anyway. Adrian's attention shifted back to her immediately. No, he said calmly. You were being forced out. Claire hesitated. She could still feel dozens of eyes watching her every movement. I do not want any trouble. You are not the one causing it. Vanessa let out a frustrated breath. Adrian, this is ridiculous. Then she glanced briefly toward Claire again before lowering her voice. You always let emotional stories cloud your judgment. Adrian's expression hardened slightly at those words. A little girl standing here wondering if people hate her for being poor is not an emotional story. It is a failure. Nobody in the boutique dared interrupt him. Lily slowly looked up at Adrian, surprised by the kindness in his voice. He noticed immediately. The tension in his face softened for the first time. What is your name? He asked gently. Lily, she answered quietly. And you play piano? Lily nodded once. At school. Adrian glanced toward the blue dress beside her. You picked that one. A tiny smile appeared on Lily's face despite everything. Yes. Vanessa looked completely irritated now by the direction of the conversation. Adrian, we are late for dinner. But he ignored her entirely. Instead, he looked toward the manager. Bring the dress to the register. Claire's eyes widened instantly. No, she said quickly. That is not necessary. Adrian looked at her calmly. Maybe not. But it is happening. Claire shook her head immediately. I cannot accept charity. This is not charity. His voice remained steady. This is correcting a mistake. The manager hurried toward the dress rack without hesitation this time. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. You cannot be serious. Adrian finally looked at her again, and the coldness in his expression made the entire room tense. Actually, he said quietly, I have never been more serious in my life. The manager rushed toward the register with nervous urgency while the entire boutique remained trapped in uncomfortable silence. Nobody knew where to look anymore. Just minutes earlier, the employees had been ready to escort Claire and Lily out the front door. Now every person in the building seemed terrified of saying the wrong thing in front of Adrian Whitmore. Claire stood frozen beside her daughter, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in energy around them. She still did not fully understand why this billionaire businessman seemed personally disturbed by what happened to Lily. But there was something in the way he kept looking at the little silver necklace that made her uneasy. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. You are embarrassing me, she said under her breath. Adrian did not even glance at her. His eyes stayed on Claire. How long has she had that necklace? Claire instinctively touched the pendant resting against Lily's sweater again. Since she was a baby, she answered cautiously. Adrian's expression darkened with thought. Where did it come from? Claire hesitated for a second. It was such a strange question that she almost refused to answer. But something about his voice made it feel important. Someone gave it to me years ago, she said quietly. Why? Adrian stared at the necklace for another long moment before slowly stepping closer. Lily looked up at him nervously but did not move away. May I see it? He asked gently. Claire carefully unclasped the necklace and placed it in his hand. The second Adrian turned the pendant over, his entire face changed. Vanessa noticed immediately. Adrian. His thumb brushed against tiny engraved initials on the back of the silver heart. AW. He went completely still. Claire's stomach tightened instantly. What is wrong? Adrian looked up at her slowly, almost like he was trying to process something impossible. Where did you get this? Claire blinked in confusion. I told you. Someone gave it to me years ago. Who? His voice had become noticeably more serious now. Claire looked uncomfortable under the growing attention surrounding them. About 9 years ago, I helped a man after a car accident outside Milwaukee during a snowstorm. He was unconscious when I found him. Adrian's eyes never left her face. Go on. Claire swallowed softly. The roads were closed because of the weather. Nobody else stopped. I stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. Vanessa frowned impatiently. What does this have to do with anything? Adrian ignored her completely. Claire continued slowly, trying to remember details she had not thought about in years. When the paramedics arrived, one of them handed me this necklace afterward. They said it belonged to him and thought he would want me to keep it because I probably saved his life. Adrian looked down at the pendant again. The boutique had become so silent that nobody dared interrupt the story unfolding in front of them. Claire shook her head slightly. I never even learned his full name. He disappeared after the hospital. Adrian closed his hand around the necklace tightly. Because I paid the hospital to keep my identity private. Claire stared at him, confused for a second. Then realization slowly crossed her face. Wait. Vanessa looked between them in disbelief. What is happening right now? Adrian finally lifted his eyes toward Claire again, and for the first time since coming downstairs, the cold control in his expression cracked emotionally. That snowstorm happened the same week my company nearly collapsed, he said quietly. I was driving back from a meeting when my car slid off the highway. Claire's face slowly lost color. Adrian held up the necklace gently. This belonged to my mother. Nobody in the boutique moved. Nobody even whispered. Lily looked between the adults in confusion while Claire struggled to process what she was hearing. Adrian looked at her with an expression filled with something far deeper than simple gratitude now. You stayed with me for almost 40 minutes in freezing weather while everyone else kept driving past. Claire's lips parted slightly. You were that man? Adrian nodded once. And if you had not stopped that night, he looked down briefly before finishing quietly. I would not be standing here today. Claire could barely breathe as memories from nearly a decade earlier rushed back into her mind. The overturned black car buried near the snowy ditch. The freezing wind cutting through her coat while she screamed for help on an empty Wisconsin highway. The unconscious man bleeding slightly near the steering wheel while other vehicles kept driving past because the storm was too dangerous to stop. She remembered sitting beside him in the snow for almost 40 minutes trying to keep him awake before the ambulance finally arrived. Back then she had been 22 years old, exhausted, pregnant, terrified, and completely alone in the world after losing both of her parents within the same year. Yet she still could not leave a stranger to die. And now that stranger stood directly in front of her. Vanessa stared at Adrian in total disbelief. You cannot seriously be connecting this woman to that story. Adrian slowly looked toward his wife, and the disappointment in his face felt heavier than anger ever could. That story, he said quietly, is the reason I survived long enough to rebuild my company. The boutique remained silent except for the soft music overhead. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Even the employees looked stunned hearing the truth unfold in front of them. Claire shook her head slightly, still overwhelmed. I never expected anything from it. Adrian looked back at her immediately. Exactly. Those single words changed the atmosphere in the room all over again. Vanessa's confident posture had completely disappeared now. Adrian, you are overreacting, she insisted carefully. We did not know who she was. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. That is the problem. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but he continued before she could speak. Why should kindness only matter after discovering someone is important? The question hit the entire room hard because everyone knew the answer. Claire lowered her eyes uncomfortably while Lily quietly stood beside her, holding the blue dress against her chest now. Adrian looked toward the manager next. You were ready to throw them out because they did not look wealthy enough for this store. The manager swallowed nervously. Sir, I was trying to protect the customer experience. Adrian stared at him coldly. You failed. The manager's face went pale. Vanessa stepped forward. Quickly. This is ridiculous. You are humiliating people over one misunderstanding. Adrian looked directly at her. No. What happened here was humiliation. The silence afterward felt suffocating. Claire could see several employees looking away in shame now. A younger sales associate quietly wiped tears from her eyes after hearing Lily's earlier question echo back in her mind. Adrian turned toward Lily again, his voice softening immediately. When is your recital? Lily looked up nervously. Friday night. Adrian nodded once. Then you should have the dress you wanted. Claire immediately shook her head again. Please do not do this because you feel indebted to me. Adrian's expression softened slightly. Claire, for 9 years I wondered who saved my life that night. Hearing her name in his voice startled her. The hospital never released your information. I searched for months. Claire stared at him in surprise. Adrian gave a faint smile filled with disbelief. And somehow I find you again standing in my store while people judge you for being kind enough to sacrifice everything for your daughter. Vanessa looked horrified now by how personal the conversation had become. Your store? Claire repeated quietly. Adrian glanced around the luxury boutique briefly. I own this company. Claire's eyes widened instantly. Suddenly everything made sense. The terrified employees. The manager's panic. The silence when he walked downstairs. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly again, clearly trying to regain some control. Fine, she said coldly. You made your point. Adrian slowly looked at her, and for the first time there was absolutely no warmth left in his expression at all. No, he replied calmly. I do not think I have yet. Adrian's words settled over the boutique like a final judgment nobody could escape from. Vanessa stood speechless for the first time all evening, her face tense with embarrassment as dozens of silent eyes remained fixed on her. The confidence she carried so easily earlier had completely vanished. Adrian turned toward the manager again. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full review of this location. The manager's face turned white instantly. Sir, please. Adrian raised one hand calmly, stopping him before he could continue. A business that punishes kindness while rewarding cruelty has already failed. Nobody dared argue with him. Several employees looked stunned, while others quietly lowered their eyes in shame. Claire shifted uncomfortably beside Lily. She never wanted anyone punished because of her. Mr. Whitmore, she said softly, that is not necessary. Adrian looked at her gently. Maybe not for you, but it is necessary for me. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. You are seriously doing all of this over one emotional moment. Adrian's expression became colder than ever. No, I am doing this because my wife publicly humiliated the woman who once saved my life. The room fell silent again. Vanessa looked around and finally realized nobody was standing with her anymore. Not the manager, not the employees, not even the shoppers who had silently watched Claire suffer earlier. She crossed her arms tightly, clearly trying to protect what little dignity she still had left. I did not know who she was, she repeated weakly. Adrian's voice stayed calm. And she still treated you with more grace than you deserved. Claire immediately looked away, uncomfortable hearing herself discussed like that. She only wanted to leave now. The entire evening had become emotionally exhausting. Lily gently tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mom. Claire looked down instantly. Yes, sweetheart. Lily smiled shyly while holding the blue dress carefully against herself. Can I really wear this Friday? Claire's eyes filled with emotion immediately. Before she could answer, Adrian knelt slightly so he could speak at Lily's eye level. You absolutely can. Lily looked at him carefully for a moment. Why are you being nice to us? The question hit everyone in the boutique harder than they expected. Adrian smiled faintly, though sadness lingered behind it. Because a long time ago, your mother was nice to someone she did not even know. Lily glanced proudly at Claire. My mom helps everybody. Claire laughed softly through the emotion building in her chest. Adrian stood again and handed the necklace back. Carefully, their fingers brushed briefly as she took it from him. I never forgot what you did that night, he said quietly. Claire looked at him for a long moment before answering honestly. I forgot almost everything about that storm. Adrian gave a small smile. I never could. The manager quietly returned with the dress carefully packaged inside a luxury garment bag. This time he handed it directly to Lily instead of Claire. I am sorry, he said softly. Lily accepted it politely, even though she clearly did not fully understand everything that had happened. Claire placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder again. We should go. Adrian's expression shifted immediately, almost like he wanted to say something more. But Claire could already feel the weight of the entire store watching them. She simply could not stay any longer. Vanessa stepped aside silently as Claire and Lily began walking toward the entrance. Nobody tried to stop them this time. The automatic glass doors slowly opened to the cold Chicago evening outside. Just before stepping out, Lily suddenly turned back toward Adrian. Will you come hear me play piano on Friday? The question caught everyone by surprise. Adrian blinked once, then smiled genuinely for the first time all night. If your mother allows it. Lily immediately looked up at Claire hopefully. Claire hesitated for only a second before giving the smallest nod. Adrian watched them disappear into the city lights beyond the boutique windows, the silver necklace still fresh in his memory, and one impossible thought quietly refusing to leave his mind. After 9 years of searching for the woman who saved his life, fate had brought her back to him in the exact moment she needed someone to stand beside her.